Hello, is it working?
You need one light.
What's that? Is this working, the micro?
Yep.
I want to make sure before we get started that Michelle, can you hear me well? Hi, Michelle. Michelle?
Oh, is it Jorge?
Yes, this is Jorge. How are you doing?
I'm fine, what about you?
Very good, welcome. So, we're here in the Master Hall at CIS and we're going to get started. So, before I introduce you and our second member...
Can you stand up? We can't see you.
What?
¿Te puedes parar aquí? We can't see.
No, it's
Why?
Because we can't see you.
You don't need to.
Okay, that's fine.
I think it's fine. It's good. I'll move the camera. So before I introduce you and our second member, I want to formally open the defense. This is Zayin Cabot's doctoral defense. The title is Ecologies of Participation in Between Shamans, Diviners and Metaphysicians. And the structure of this defense is going to be rather standard. After introducing the committee members, I'll pass the word to Zayin, who will present his work for about 45 to 60 minutes. And then each committee member will have around 10-15 minutes to engage appreciatively and critically the candidate. And after which, hopefully, there will be also some time for the audience to engage Zayin as Jake and I go outside and call Michelle to discuss the defense and come back with a final verdict. So I want to say before I introduce the committee members that this is obviously a public event, and this is another way to say that it's a participatory event, as I like to say. And I would like to invite you, all the audience, to be here present with Zayin to support him with your presence and mindfulness and attention for this threshold that he has been preparing himself to cross for a long time. So this is an important moment, and I hope that all of you as his community are here as present and mindful as you can be in this moment. It's a community event, not only an individual event. So that being said, I would like to first of all introduce our external member. You can see him in the screen, Dr. Michel Weber, and he's the director of the Center for Philosophical Practice, Chromatics with Whiteheadianness from Brussels, Belgium. His current research program mainly deals with political philosophy and the philosophy of psychiatry. Dr. Weber is the author of 9 monographs. One of them is called Whitehead's Pancreativism, and the co-editor of more than 30 books, one of them with William Desmond, and it's called Handbook of Whiteheadian Process Thought. William Desmond, as you will see, is a main player in Zayin's dissertation. He has been teaching philosophy and sociology, for example, at the New Bulgarian University, St. Luke Art College, and Brussels European School. Michel, is there anything you would like to add to this introduction?
No, I'm sure it's fine. But I have difficulties to hear you, actually.
Okay, I'll put the micro closer and I'll try to speak slower later. Maybe it's my accent.
I'm sure you have no accent whatsoever.
Okay, so let me go and introduce our second member, Jacob Sherman, and he's assistant professor here at CIS in philosophy and religion. He received his PhD in philosophy and religion from the University of Cambridge and has taught previously as visiting lecturer in philosophy and religion and ethics at King's College in London. His writings have appeared in journals such as Religious Studies and Modern Theology. In addition, he's the co-editor, with myself, of the participatory turn Spirituality, Mysticism and Religious Studies, and he's the author of Partakers of the Divine, Contemplation and the Practice of Philosophy, forthcoming book from Fortes Press. I highly recommend everybody to buy because I'm sure it's going to be brilliant. No intake. So my name is Jorge Ferrer and I am core faculty here in this West Ecology program. And I think that we're going to leave it here, these introductions, and I'm going to pass the word to Zayin so that he can proceed with his doctoral presentation.
Cool.
So the stage is yours.
A little technical something before, and then we'll keep going. So, Michelle, can you see me fine, Michelle?
I do see you, and I think that your microphone is better.
Yeah.
At the same time, the way the sound is frequency to see like when you have center of tone communication.
Oh, it echoes?
A little bit like that, yes.
Yeah.
It might be the case that your microphone is better.
Okay, so you can see, and you can see the screen fine, the PowerPoint?
I do, but I'd like to hear you as well, you know?
Yeah. So you can hear fine though?
Let's say yes.
All right, let's say yes. All right, so we're going to start. I'm going to ask everybody to close your eyes, right? Because we're at CIS. So everyone just closing your eyes for a moment, and taking a couple deep breaths. And while you're taking a couple deep breaths, I'm going to ask each and every one of you to imagine a very bright green line in front of you, right? And I'm going to imagine that same bright green line in front of myself. And now this is a double invitation, right? So there may be some of those of you that want to stay on the outside of a sacred space that we're going to create, because this will be a ritual. And some of you are going to want to step across that line and come inside. So you have a choice. You can do either or. But I'm going to take a step across that green line, and I'm going to move into a sacred space and invite anyone else who would like to join me to step into that space, because we need to make sure this whole thing works, right? Something has to happen today. We need to be surprised today. We need something larger than ourselves to show up and make sure that this isn't a waste of our time and this isn't a waste of their time. And so, with all of your emotions, your day, whatever it might be, just taking a step into the circle. And as you find yourself in, or if you find yourself wanting to stay out and kind of supporting from the outside, which is also an important role, opening your eyes and joining me here in this little sacred circle that we're going to have for a few hours, a couple hours. Ecologies of participation, right? And in between shamans, diviners, and metaphysicians. The whole piece is about, all of this came about from me having these kind of wild experiences, this life that didn't quite seem to match what I found around me. And so this has been a journey of trying to figure out, who am I, right? Like, why else, in some ways, why else would you do all this work if you weren't trying to figure out something so important as, who am I? Why else would you do such a thing? And so what's the point? I've been able to locate myself. And what you'll find is a way that I've managed to figure out who in the world I am and how in the world I can walk in the world, and beyond the dissertation, right? Like, the dissertation is important and the scholarly work is important, but beyond all of that, what's more important is the fact that somehow in here I changed. I became more of who I am and articulated that. And what's maybe more important about that is that now I know how to help someone else go through that process, right? And so this is kind of a community event, and this is one of the first practices of doing this particular work, right? But there's a second point. The puzzle that has always been inside of me is there's this Western world, and especially for me, it's always been about philosophy. And then there's these other worlds that I walk in, and how do I hold these two things? So let's just call this Western philosophy and West African divination. How do those two things go together, right? It might sound, who knows what that sounds like to you, but to me that's been an incredibly difficult journey. And so this is the outcome of that, right? But the idea, and this is the thing, at the end of all of this, have I helped to open pathways of communication, right? Is it possible that what I've done has made it more easily accessible for different kinds of peoples to talk to one another? That's the point. Whether or not I've succeeded, that's for all of you to judge, and that's for the future to tell, but that's the point. The point is, how in the world can we communicate with each other, and how can I communicate with all these crazy things that are going on inside myself? Right? It's not so simple. My experience is actually quite complex, as is all of yours. So I'm going to start by telling a little bit of a story. It's a story I've told one other time in public, so this is the second telling. But what's more important is, right, this thing's going to be published in a dissertation, and so these things are going to become even more public, and hopefully a book someday, and more public, right? So maybe a safe, sacred place to start to share some of these things. When I graduated from the University of Hawaii in philosophy, I was depressed. Philosophy is depressing in the way that it's practiced. For me, at least that was my experience. And I was at a place that was very, very broadly defined. The University of Hawaii, right? I mean, Jorge and Jacob probably have a good idea of what that means. Like, this place was very open, and yet I still was depressed, right? So coming out of that, a good friend of mine, Alec, who couldn't be here today, called me and he said, do you want to go to South America? And the words that were in my head were, South America sounds like salvation if you say it enough times. And that was serious. Like, I was scared. I didn't know what was going to happen to me. I didn't know where I was going. So this was a really serious thing, right? So I go down, I buy a one-way ticket to South America, and immediately people start asking me, have you been to Machu Picchu? Are you going to Machu Picchu? I'm like, what in the world is Machu Picchu? I've never heard of Machu Picchu. I bought a one-way ticket. I have no idea what I'm doing down here. None, zero, right? But I figured, well, you know, everyone's telling me I gotta go to this place, so I go. And we hike. The short story is we hike up the back way. It's a 4-day hike from the backside. And unbeknownst to me at the time, we show up on the winter solstice of 2000, right? Pretty powerful day, a day that this place was largely created for. But I didn't know that. And I had this guide who's any other guide. I hired the guy on the street in Cusco, right? Who knows where this guy came from? Turns out he's something more of a medicine man, right? So we show up to this rock, right? Early in the morning. And every year, at this day, at this time, the Incans have been tying the sun to this rock to make sure that the world continues. I had no idea about any of that. So here's this guy who happens to be a little bit more of a guide than what I thought he was, right? And here's his teacher sitting there. I didn't know what was going on. This anthropologist, right, who also happens to be something of a medicine man, is sitting there, and they're both here to tie the sun to the rock that day. And so the invitation that this man asked is, he said, put your hand next to the rock and just feel the energy. Right? And so I'm with a lot of different people, and some people step back and they're kind of laughing. Some other people step towards and do this thing, and my heart starts beating. I'm like, something's going on. So I go towards this rock, and I put my hand close to the rock, and I get sucked in. Pop! Right? Poof, it's gone. The world's gone. I'm the rock. And the entire Incan Empire flashes before my eyes. It's like a near-death experience of the Incan Empire. What the hell happened? How long was I in there? I don't know what happened. I popped back out. Whoa, the world had shattered, right? The whole world had shattered. There used to be this solid world, and suddenly I'm in a world of vibrating white light. And I fall to my knees, and I don't know what's going on, and I'm inundated by all the spirits of this place. So now I've got two problems. I've got all the spirits of this place knocking on my door, and I've got the light. What the hell's the light? Jesus. This lady is nice enough to help me to the lawn in Machu Picchu, which you're actually not allowed to walk on anymore. And I sit there, and I kind of take it all in. And so it's been a long time. I've been trying to take this in for a long time. One of the things, so here's the deal with the light. The light is everything that ever is and has been and will be. So I don't exist as far as that is concerned, and nor do any of you. That's a stressful situation if you identify as the not light looking at the light, right? If you're the light, it's fine. But I couldn't always maintain that. I'm stuck back and forth, back and forth. And all these spirits are knocking on my door, and I'm wondering, am I crazy? And so, one of the things that helped me through this, that's relevant today, is sitting with Whitehead's work, a man named Alfred North Whitehead. And I felt like, for once in my life, I could make sense of everything. And I could actually say something, right? Like, I was taught in my undergraduate degree in philosophy that you really couldn't say anything. And here's this guy, and he's doing metaphysics. And I'm thinking, whoa, like, I think I could say something. Even to these people who say that I can't say something, right? but I'm still scared. So I meet this lady named Marina Romero, who's probably hiding out in here somewhere. There's Marina. And Ramon Alvareda, and they've started this whole beautiful work. And the work is about, a lot of you know about this work, but let's just say it's about a polarity between light and dark, right? And so I've been working with Marina and Ramon for a little while, and we decide we're gonna go do a divination on top of the hill behind Lake Anza, right up here, right? They have some stuff they wanna figure out. I'm like, let's go do it. I'm walking around the lake, and as I'm walking around the lake, I realize I'm not scared. For the first time since I realized I was scared when I was about 20 years old, that there was this deep, depressive, crazy hole in the center of me, I realized I wasn't scared anymore. And what was the thing that allowed me to not be scared anymore? Because I could be the light, but can I always be the light? That got exhausting, right? A polarity is what saved me. Right? I wasn't the light, I wasn't the dark. I was some sort of play of the in-between, and there was meaning there for me, right? So I wasn't scared. So, that's a little bit of the backstory. This is dissertation defense. There's some technical pieces to all of this. It's a rather large work. It's a rather complex work. And so I'm going to focus on one little chapter. I'm going to focus on this third chapter for today. And I'm going to focus on 3 basic ideas. But I want you to remember the story. The story is important. Like, why in the world am I doing all this, right? The story is important. So I'm going to focus on 3 things that I think are something of a contribution. I think the most obvious contribution coming out of this dissertation is in the field of ethnographic theory. I think that there's a very clear avenue of publication that way, and these are some of the things that are important and reasons why this will be interesting to these people. So for the audience, I apologize. Some of this may not make any sense at all. But for the committee, I'm basically going to say that there's this idea of relativism in De Scola's work, and that by reading De Scola next to William Desmond, I'm able to solve that critique. There's a critique that's leveled against De Scola from within the literature, and I think I'm able to help him along with this by reading him next to Desmond. I'm going to critique the way that De Scola talks about analogy. I think that's very problematic. And so I'm going to make a broader definition of totemism, a broader definition of naturalism, and then add something called atomism in place of analogism, which is one of his categories. And then the third thing I'm going to talk about is ecological perspectivism, which is kind of cool, and I will leave that for later. So, De Scola, I came across, so I wrote a bunch of work on Whitehead, right? I'm sitting in my room, I'm writing all this stuff around Whitehead, and I'm thinking, who's ever going to read this, right? A few Whiteheadian scholars are going to think this might be interesting, maybe, right? That's even, like, who's going to read this thing? And so I had to take a step back, and I wanted to write an introduction to this work. So when I went to write the introduction to this work, I stumbled across the work of this man, De Scola. And so De Scola sets up De Scola's original work was basically a social constructivist work, right? He assumed that there was this thing called nature. Totemism, animism, naturalism are 3 different ways of constructing culture based around this assumption. He's working in the Amazon with the Ashwar and some other groups of people. So is this other man, Eduardo de Viveros de Castro. So Viveros de Castro reads what De Scola has written, and he says, whoa, 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 you've misunderstood animism. Animists don't assume that there's one thing called nature. They don't assume that there's a given physicality. They're struggling with multiple realities. There's not a stability of physicality, right? So it's a radically different thing than what you said it was. They're not socially constructing something based on this idea of nature. They're actually constructing realities. They're enacting different realities. So Discola takes this to heart, right? And what you'll see with the blue is things that then Discola starts to add. He adds this thing called analogism, cultures, like all the stuff in blue is stuff that he starts to add to the bit. But then I'm thinking, a lot of the red is where I start to come in and have problems with what Discola has said. And so, you know, that's not all necessary to take in at this moment, but just as a sense of like, there's this problem. It has a lot to do with his use of analogy and analogism, and so that's kind of where I'm coming at him from. But I do need to give you kind of a sense of what in the world is he talking about, right? There's all these things, animism, totemism, what is all this stuff? So, animism, really, it's Viveros de Castro that's really pushing this thing and that Discola has picked up on. But what Discola has said is, so Viveros de Castro critiques him, and he says, whoa, I can't assume that there's this thing called nature, and I can't assume there's some sort of given structures, right? Like there's not a structure called animism and people fall into it. So he assumes that there's something in human beings that's relational, and that there's two basic assumptions to that. That human beings experience an interiority and a physicality, not whether or not those things are real or existent, or he doesn't go into all that. He's saying this is the basic thing. He's following Husserl and a psychologist named Bloom, he said. Right? And he says you can either have a relationship to the interiority of someone else. So I can share an interior with you, or we could be totally different interior, or I could share a physicality with you, or it could be totally different. Right? So what the animist is doing, says Discola and Viveros de Castro, is assuming that the interiority is the same, the people. So there's the rock people, the wolf people, the buffalo people, the Ishwara people, the English-speaking people. There's all these people, but the interior is always the same. What's different is the body. Bodies are different. So if the people are wearing a rock body, they're going to have rock experiences. If a people is wearing an Ishwar body, they're going to have Ishwar experiences. In a beaver body, beaver experiences. And you can switch. You could be an Ishwar, and then you could become a beaver, and you might be able to come back, or you might not, right? And so what is interesting to them is trying to maintain a stability of the body. And that there are some people that venture beyond the stability of the body and become beavers intentionally. We're going to call those shamans eventually, but we haven't got that far yet. So just think, in a simple way, animism assumes that there's one people, but there's multiple realities. And this is radically different than the assumption. I'll come back to totemism. So naturalism is the assumption that there's one reality. And there's multiple beings. There's somehow different relationships to this one reality. And so some sort of shared physicality. So imagine like Aristotle, in order to do his logic, has to assume, right, that there's some stability, there's some pattern, there's something there that there's a stable pattern across. And in assuming that, he then, what I'm suggesting is, he then enacts a different kind of being based on that assumption. But note that that is not the assumption of what the animist is saying. There is no stability of the body. Those patterns that Aristotle finds so fascinating are not nearly as relevant to the animist, because those patterns don't hold. They're not as interested in the parts of the world that hold so well. So the naturalism assumes one reality. So imagine all these ladies here, right? They all assume this one thing. They're all lying on this floor, right? But then they close their eyes, and one of them's a Muslim, and one of them's a Christian, one of them is an atheist, right? One of them, who knows what they are? But this is the basic idea. right? That the interiority can be radically different, but that there's a shared reality, a shared physicality that holds true, right? So this is a very different idea than what the animist is working with. There's this other thing, right? The polarity. So imagine when I went into the rock, I got sucked into the rock, right? That's an animist thing. The interiority didn't change, my body literally changed. I became a rock, and so I saw like a rock. In totemism, there's a shared physicality and a shared interiority. And so at the very extreme, Australian Aboriginals, some Central American people, they identify as the cosmos, right? They locate themselves in absolute space. And so there's no left-right. There's no up-down. There's no sense of self, like what you would think of as self. They literally talk as if they were the cosmos. So they speak in absolute directions, which is kind of a wild idea, which I can't quite tease apart here. But that's on the further end. As you come in a little bit, basically just like a theory of correlations, right? So what I want to suggest, slightly different than Descola, is that West African, ancient Chinese, Central American theories of correlations are actually totemic, that they're based around some idea of a polarity. So there's these three things, and then Descola, taking Viveros de Castro's critique to heart, he thinks, okay, I've got shared interiority and shared physicality. I call it that totemism. I've got shared interiority and a difference in physicality. I'm going to call that animism, right? Naturalism is a shared physicality, a difference of interiority. So he's got this, for his system to work, he's got to make up something for a difference of interiority and a difference, like an equivocity of interiority and physicality. So this is the one thing that he invents in his new work, let's say, to account for his system. But it's really problematic. So what he starts to do is any use of analogy, he assumes it's because there's a root assumption of discontinuity of physicality, discontinuity of interiority. So there's like a root assumption that's flirting with nihilism, right? It's flirting with the idea that there's this kind of meaninglessness. There's no connection. There's no thing shared. And so what he says is that analogy is used as like a desperate attempt at meaning making. So analogy is conflated with this assumption of radical discontinuity, and then a desperate need to make meaning. So he puts most of the Western tradition into this category. He highlights the Renaissance with its great chain of being, right? But he puts most of the Western tradition in this category. He puts all of China, ancient China, into this category. He puts West Africa, Central America, the whole Vedic system, right? He puts a huge number of people into this category. And that's problematic. And one of the really good things for me that happened is that Descola's book didn't come out. I came across Descola's book through a 15-page essay that he wrote introducing his book, which was at that point in French and hadn't been translated yet. So I didn't read Descola and his idea about totemism early on. And so I knew something was up, but I didn't quite know exactly what it was. And so what I did is I went to the sources that Descola was talking about, and I found some of my own. And I read this guy named Brandenstein. And so Brandenstein says that polarity and analogy are at the very heart of totemic thought. So analogy is at the heart of Australian Aboriginal thought, which is what Descola calls totemism. But he's got this other idea, right? Analogy is a desperate attempt at meaning making, having assumed a radical discontinuity. And so there's a disconnect there. And so it's just sort of one pointer at the idea that the totemism is a much broader thing, that analogy isn't such a bad thing. And so what Brandenstein does is he writes this interesting article. Empedocles and Australian Aboriginals have shared some concepts. Right? Basically, he's just saying that there's this thing, it's called totemism, a thinking in polarities, in correlations, and lots of people did it. And so in the dissertation, I point to this, but I also go through and point to Levinson's work on Neo-Orphean linguistic relativity, G.E.R. Lloyd's work comparing ancient Greek and Chinese, and then a whole host of folks in cognitive sciences who are all in some ways saying, hey, analogy is not that bad. Analogy is very healthy. There's healthy ways to use this. It's throughout the, like, you can't be a human and not use analogy to some extent. And so that problematizes de Scolla's whole analogous, his whole category of analogism. So that's, in some point, that first piece of analogy, right? Like I broaden these definitions. But then de Scolla has this piece where he's writing, like a critique comes at him. What, if these things, if these four different, he calls them ontologies, are so radically, if they really are four different ontologies, radically different, is there some way to translate between them? So Lloyd and Keene both make this point. Is there some sort of commensurability or translatability between these two things? Or these four ecology, or he says ontologies, I'm going to change it to ecologies for a specific reason, right? So they're asking him, what's the translation? How does this work? And that's where bringing in Desmond helps me to ground it in what Desmond calls agape, right? So beginning with something like hyperbolic overabundance of being, and so before I get to that piece, just saying, like, what is Desmond talking about? He sets up this threefold thing: agape, eros, curiosity, right? So you begin in agape. It's like this minimally differentiated agapic sort of tension between univocity and equivocity. It's there's a very minimal amount of any kind of self-determination there, if at all. So it's just like this agapic overabundance. But if that becomes too much, there's like a step away from agape a little bit, right? A step towards eros. Think of like erotic tension. In order to have that tension, that eros between, there has to be a little bit more of a sense of self, univocity, and a little bit more sense of otherness, right? There has to be some distance to have eros. If there's not that distance, it's just a union. And so if that eros becomes too much, if it's a little too overwhelming, it moves into curiosity. Like once you've found your way towards curiosity, you've really moved away from agape and eros, right? You've settled on a question, a curiosity, some particularity. And so what you see is this movement from agape towards curiosity. And throughout this, what's interesting is Desmond works a lot with Aquinas, and he works a lot with Hegel. And throughout that whole process, both of these people are using analogy, right? And so what you see is a movement of abstraction, more abstract analogies. So analogy is not wrong. It's not necessarily abstract or desperate, but it can become so. And so that allows me to see naturalism as more of an erotic thing, erotic dialectic. So naturalism and totemism and animism as more erotic in nature, but that they can move towards abstraction. And so De Scola's fourth category of his ontology of radical discontinuity, I think of as a movement from eros to curiosity. So a movement towards atomism is a movement, is an abstract movement. So analogy is not necessarily wrong, but you can see a movement of analogy. It also allows me to solve, in some ways, the problem of commensurability. If all of this is grounded in agapic union, what is agape? What is hyperbolic overabundance? Desmond uses the word like strange intimacy of being. What is that? Nobody knows. We all, we play at it, we try at it, but once you start to articulate it a little bit more, that's going towards eros, right? Or even further towards curiosity. And so, in a sense, what De Scola didn't do is he didn't ask sort of the philosophical question, who's identifying as a shared interiority or a different physicality? He didn't define his term ontology very well. It becomes confusing. And so he's left himself open to this critique. And I think reading Desmond next to him helps that an awful lot. The other thing so what does Desmond get out of the deal, right? So Desmond talks about this idea of metaxology. So Desmond focuses on a dialectic, like there's multiple dialectics between univocity and equivocity. And what he says is there's going to be multiple one. Metaxology means that there's a participation between different dialectics. Like let's just say, what I want to do is use animism, totemism, and naturalism as different erotic impulses towards self-determination. And so what I want to do is give that to Desmond and say, look, here's radically different dialectics. And this helps him solve, so Don Caputo, when he wrote the intro to the new William Desmond reader, he's very generous, and he's saying this is a really important work, but he also says, wait, how do we know that Desmond isn't just an Aquinian? Like, isn't he just doing medieval philosophy? Or how do we know he's not just being a phenomenologist? Is there any difference between what he's doing and these traditional sort of metaphysical stances? Is there something novel in what he's up to? And I think if you read his metaxology in this way, and give him animism, give him totemism, give him radically different dialectics, he's saved from the Western tradition in that way. And it becomes something really interesting and new, and a great place of I want to say cross-ecological dialogue, but you might in another situation say cross-cultural dialogue. And so then there's this other piece where De Scola and Viveros de Castro conflate naturalism with what I want to call postmodernity, but what Bruno Latour would call modernity. And so this is moving into the third point around ecological perspectivism. So what they do, what De Scola and Viveros de Castro do, is they offer this really amazing broad definition of animism, right? Like, animists create realities, but naturalists don't. Naturalists are constructivists. Animists are enacting realities, right? And so, but they both bemoan this. They're both struggling with this. They're both saying, why are naturalists so superficial? What is this thing? And so they're struggling with it, but they've also conflated all of naturalism with it, which is why I wrote the second chapter, which I don't think it maybe wasn't as clear, but the idea is if you say naturalism today, especially in philosophical circles, it's going to mean, analytic philosophers are who are playing with this word, right? And so I tried to address that, and I think there's probably ways in which that could be better addressed. But that was the idea. Like, if I'm going to use this word naturalism, I've got to tease apart what De Scola is saying and what, in the way that it's used in the literature. And I think De Scola tends towards, he used to have a broad definition of naturalism, but after Viveros Castro's critique, he got this much thinner definition. And so in contrast to Viveros Castro and De Scola, I want to come back to Jorge and Jacob's work, right? This idea of participatory inaction. So what Jorge and Jacob are saying is that there's no given, like a spiritual ultimate is not given, it's co-created, right? And I want to give that, like basically what Viveros Castro did is he gave that to the animists, he gave that to the people in the Amazon, he gave that to, you know, all these different groups of people, but he didn't give it to the Western tradition, he didn't give it to the Vedic tradition. He didn't give it to anybody else. He just gave it to this small group of people. And what they're saying is that animism is the opposite of naturalism. So they should be equally robust terms, but he hasn't allowed for that. So naturalism becomes thin and kind of a weak term. Animism is this big, beautiful, robust term. And so if you read it next to Jorge and Jacob's work, you get this idea of participatory inaction. And you can, I think it even strengthens your work in that it opens up the door to start talking about a whole other set of traditions. Like I was thinking about who's written about, let's say, just call it shamanism in the participatory world, and Make's Mark is the only essay that I could think of. There's a wanting to move towards that. But it hasn't, this allows you to go towards those traditions in a more clear way. But it also broadens Viveros Castro and De Scola's thing. So, what are we talking about? Ecological perspectivism, right? So what Viveros Castro is saying is that when one of these people puts on these feathers, they're doing it so that they can become a bird, literally. Clothing matters to such an extent that if you put on a beaver outfit, you might become a beaver. And you might not ever come back. Right? It's a radically unstable physicality. And you can get way out there in it all. Right? And so what Viveros Castro is saying is that all of these people on the right, they're all putting on different clothing to enact different realities, physical realities, right? What Jorge and Jacob are saying is that all these folks on the left are enacting different spiritual ultimates, right? And so what I want to say is this is naturalist in action, and this is animist in action. And there must also be a third, right? There must be totemic in action. So, if you assume a polarity, right? So you assume the polarity. You don't think about it. Like I was talking to Malidoma Some about this, who's a Dagre elder, and he was saying, everyone thinks we think in polarities. We don't think in polarities. And I'm not going to get too much into the subtleties of that conversation, but no, you don't think in them. You assume them, right? He assumes polarity. He never calls into question the polarity. It's obvious from the outside that they're working with polarities. What they enact is a cosmos. What they're concerned with is the cosmos. They create the cosmos, co-create the cosmos. If you assume the people, as in animism, you enact a becoming, right? You enact a new reality, a new physicality. And so I want to call that shamanism. If you assume nature, or if you assume a single reality, right? So you kind of take that for granted. You enact different interiorities, different spiritual ultimates, different, humans, culture, scientific observers, all of these folks, in some kind of way are assuming a single reality and then enacting something relative to that. And I want to call that a metaphysician, someone who enacts interiorities. And so, just kind of wrapping up at this point, right? Animist Shamans risk bodies. Remember the subtitle, right? In between diviners, shamans, and metaphysicians. Shamans risk bodies, skins, physicalities. They create realities, right? So just to use Malidoma as an example, like within the Dogma tradition, there's a possibility of risking your body, of becoming a chicken, or of becoming a goat, or something completely different, right? Like there are people who wander out and risk their bodies. And then there's other people who hold the body tight, and they're careful about what they eat, and there's all these things that you do to maintain the stability of the body, but a shaman risks that, right? A naturalist is going to tend not to do that. Like I got sucked into the rock. That was a wild experience. How many of you have been sucked into something and became that? Since then, I'll be walking down the street and suddenly I'm the pigeon looking at me. That's a crazy experience. And it happens all the time, right? These are different things going on, but they can happen in the same group of people. When I talk to Malidoma Some about the real, or if I talk to him about being, or if I talk to him about all these questions, right? He's like, his answer is, you know, that's like the white man's disease. And that's fine, but it's also really important, right? Like I'm here to defend that too. So I'm not going to fall all the way over into the Dogma perspective. Like the Dogma are not interested in the interiority. They're not interested in these conversations about reality and being and what we would think of as philosophy and metaphysics. They're silly questions. They make no sense. But the Dogma are concerned with totemic things. They're concerned with creating reality, right? Going back to this idea of analogy, if I'm doing a divination in the Dogma tradition, I use analogy to open up realities. But I have to be careful because I could go too far. Like I could go too far and risk the polarity, the tension. I could, let's say, invite the ancestors into a divination, and if I mix that line too close, I could become an ancestor and risk the integrity of the polarity, right? So what totemic people are worried about, what concerns them, is familiarity. They're concerned about getting too close to either side of the polarity because it will all fall down. There won't be any more, the tension will disappear and the whole thing will collapse. And so that's what they fear, but diviners risk that every single day. That's what diviners do. They create the cosmos over and over again in a million different ways. And so my thing, right, Ecologies of Participation, I kind of basically reimagined Discola's fourfold way as a fivefold way. I gave him primary participation, right? There's this critique against Discola that of vulgar relativism, right? Like, what? This doesn't make any sense. How do people communicate across these things? And so I give him, by reading Discola next to Desmond, I give him the primary participation. And I've tried to give a broad definition of naturalism and totemism in order to get rid of this piece around analogism, right? And I've also, this whole piece, I think what Michelle likes, you know, radical empiricism. I've turned back towards agapic and erotic participation instead of assuming that empiricism means atomistic or scientific abstraction, right? The conversation between realism and relativism starts to kind of fall down here, right? If you turn towards, like Whitehead would do, a more radical empiricism. And then this ecological perspectivism, this is me defining myself, right? Shaman, metaphysician, diviner, like I can own these things, but it's more important than that. It's actually, this is a mode of communication, and then can people, there's a whole conversation about this, but like, how do people start to interact across these things? And I think that's a question the different people from the committee asked me in different ways. And we'll probably maybe get to some of that. But these are the basic things that I've offered in that third chapter. Is the primary participation, which accounts for the problem of relativism. The broad definition of analogism, which accounts for De Scola's struggles with, like just his category of analogy is suspect. And then the ecological perspectivism, which broadens De Scola and Vivero's really beautiful articulation of animism and allows someone else to be able to enact a reality other than an animist. And then the agapic and the empiricism, just going back to a more radical empiricism, which is related back to this idea of primary participation. Limitations, as we come down, right? So I put the cart before the horse. People in the audience may or may not get this, right? But my committee gets this, right? So I was writing this work on Whitehead, and I'm sitting in my room writing it, and then I decided to write a much broader theoretical work, which is not what you're supposed to do. Like that's not how it works, right? It's not really totally allowable. But I wouldn't have done it any other way, because now I know how to approach Whitehead, right? Like the steps going forward, like I think I can more, I have a clear idea of what in the world I'm talking about when I go towards him and other people, right? So I feel like I had to do this first, and I feel like what happens a lot in academia is that you don't get to do this till you're old, and then, you know, it's like, I keep thinking of Robert Bellah, like, he got to write his big book after he retired. And I'm not so sure about that. I get both sides, but I'm not so sure about, this is what I chose to do, and so here we are. And then there's this big long list of other things that my limitations, right? I'll start with the easy one first, like where's Whitehead? You know, coming. I know it's like a promise, right? And there's a couple articles, more minor articles published, but there's more coming. But then I think a more serious thing is this whole history of philosophy and the reception of my ideas and the way that I tend to overreach and talk about a whole variety of things that maybe I'm not really qualified to talk about. And that, you know, it's a tricky thing. Like, I think that's a personality thing. It's something that I have to be very aware of. I'm never going to be the great historian of philosophy. That's just not a personality trait of mine. But yeah, I take this very seriously. Right? Going forward, I'm very aware of the need to engage more seriously. And so seeing this really as like my first little baby step into this world, knowing that there's a lot of work to be done going forward. And then there's this whole Levinson and De Scola piece, which is also kind of suspect. Does it complicate the dissertation? Does it, you know, I keep having this thing, like, what would Levinson think if he read this? I think he might freak out. Like, I don't know if Levinson would be on board with this. But I think it's possible that that he should be, right? And so there's a potentially a need, we'll see, like there may be a need to take that out of the dissertation, but to try to argue that somewhere else. Because I think there is a very clear line of argument, but it might be too much. And then this whole like theory of everything. Is that what I did? That would suck, right? Like this whole thing was about opening avenues of communication, and what if I just became the next Ken Wilber? Like, it's a funny thing, but it's a real thing. Like, what if that's what I did? What if I just stuffed everyone into little, you know, you're a naturalist, you're an animist, blah, 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 and I stopped conversation. So it's a serious thing. It's a funny thing, but it's also a very serious thing. And I'm sure there are a lot more limitations. But, research project going forward. This was the thing that I was writing when I had to stop and figure out, why am I sitting in my room writing this crazy thing? And so what I was doing is I was going through Whitehead's concept of nature and working with him and working with the concept of nature, and the way that I felt like he was moving beyond you know, the common idea of what that was, moving towards a radical empiricism, really. And then following his fascination with this idea of atomism, right? Like, what is physics, the contemporary physics of the 20th century? What are they pushing us? Like, we have to deal with this. What are they doing to us? And so following him as is through all this stuff till on, 4/7, whatever month that is, April. So on April 7th, he finally comes into class, right? And he's like, he says, I'm muddle-headed and I da-da-da, and then he just lays it down. What did he lay down, right? For me, that's the question. What happened in that classroom on that day? And I think that I have something to say about it with this animism, totemism, and naturalism. Michelle has very graciously thought of this work as highly suspect. So we'll see. Like, I have to play this out, right? This chapter 5, Higher Phases of Experience, this is what saved me, right? This was me. This is me sitting in a room in Sebastopol with nobody around, losing my mind. And this is what saved me, was this chapter, right? So there's something there for me, and so this is the path. This is this piece around Whitehead that I hope to do going forward. And a lot of, especially this middle piece is already written, but I have to redo the terminology because of what I've done here. Doggerel Divination and Philosophy a la Holbrod. Holbrod is a student of Viveros de Castro and de Scola. He wrote this amazing book where he says, if you're going to do philosophy, you should pay attention to Cuban Ifa diviners. He calls it recursive anthropology. He makes his whole argument for it. I want to kind of follow that idea using my ecologies of participation and work more with doggerel divination. Because I think that the same kind of argument, but done slightly differently. I had this crazy proposal, right? Like, I don't even know what the title of my proposal for this dissertation was. And then I had Whitehead and Cassira and all these people floating around, Gebser. Michelle refused to be on my committee if I had all of those people, so I got rid of Cassira. But he's always still back there somewhere, right? And this goes back to the history of philosophy and how I locate myself. And I'm fascinated by modern philosophy, but I'm also fascinated by German idealism. And even though I may not have a steady grasp on it, I feel like I need to follow that line in order to get to Whitehead eventually. So I feel like I do have a grasp on Whitehead, but there's this whole thing that I have to work through eventually. So that's a much longer term goal. So what, right? Ellie made me promise that I would end by reading something because I talk differently than I write, I guess. So I'm going to read you the last couple pages, or the last paragraph, really, from my dissertation. So I write, let's see where is that? I follow Apfel Margolin, thank you. In the Doggerel tradition, that's the ancestors saying yes. I follow Apfel Margolin, who sees her work as an important contribution to symmetrical anthropology. She writes, the field of European history is well-trodden and highly specialized. Encroaching on this terrain by a non-specialist can immediately signal a lack of depth and precision and raise the specter of amateurism. I have risked the specter of amateurism by engaging such a broad project, and yet I have grounded this project as much in my own experience as I have done in the work of others. To this end, it seems to me that a project of this nature requires a certain amount of feedback from the academic world. If I had offered an ethnography of doggerel diviners, a comparison of Doggerel and Yoruba cosmologies, or a comparison of Desmond's metaxology and Whitehead's pancreativism, I would be on more obvious ground. But I have offered something else, a comparative lens, Ecologies of Participation, a critical reading of de Scola and Viveros de Castro, ecological perspectivism, in the context of ethnographic theory. The contribution to the Academy may be as important as it is unique. This is not for me to decide, but rather for time to tell. Far more important than its reception. It is of vital importance that this project has transformed me. I now know what a diviner, a shaman, and a metaphysician is. I find myself walking through my days and moving more overtly toward one or the other than I have ever done in the past. I am freed to pursue these practices in ecological perspectivism with great abandon. I can see clear avenues towards teaching, writing, and mentoring others with regard to these practices. It has been a long and difficult journey, and yet I know far more better who I am. I've been offered a whole new level of freedom, flexibility in my cross-ecological travels. And as these vistas open up before me, I am quite sure that I have enacted something meaningful and even quite profound. I mean to plant these pages in the rich soil of a changing academy and watch them grow. There are moments when I am attached and moments when I relax. And it is in the latter that I feel the incredible possibility that is the fruit of this labor. I end with gratitude. To my wife, who stood by my side throughout this project. To my family, because they maintained the magic. To my committee for their dedication and support. And to the Dogger for their acceptance of my idiocy. And to the countless others, the rocks, the trees, the ancestors, the friends and the mentors, the water and the earth, may we all enjoy the fruits of our agapic and erotic participation.
Thank you. Is this working? Yes? Yes. Thank you very much, Zayin, for this touching conclusion of your defense, as well as for your engaging and stimulating and conceptually demanding presentation. And I take that as a compliment. And we're going to move into engagement with the committee members, and normally as a courtesy I invite our external member to go first, and then our second member, and I will go last. So Michelle, whenever you are ready, you can say a few words about the work and engage the candidate with questions, comments. It's up to you.
Right, do you hear me?
Can we turn that up? Can anyone? We can hear you, but they're going to turn it up a little bit more.
Sorry?
We can hear you, but they're going to turn it up just a little bit more. So you're good.
So you can hear me?
We can. Yes. Let's assume we can.
Okay, well, so hello everyone. Hello. Everyone is saying hello. I'll make first a brief introductory statement, then raise a couple of questions, and eventually I'll demand a sacrifice. It comes straight from the Monty Pythons, don't worry. So, first, the introductory statement. So, every thesis raises again and again the question, what is philosophy? How does one philosophize, and why philosophize in the first place? Historically, philosophy has been first an art of life. It's very clear in early Greek philosophy, but also if you look at other traditions like in India, China, etc., etc. So first, historically, philosophy was an art of life. Later came scholarship. In order to become, so to speak, a philosopher, you have to comply with a theoretical cursus, and so you have various degrees. The requirements are basically, first, to be able to grasp the entire philosophical territory, if possible. Second, to identify concepts and individuals, characters, and to link the two. So to be able to identify trajectories and legacies, conceptual trajectories on the one hand, and personal legacies on the other. And third, the philosopher should be able to philosophize for himself or herself, so to make some contribution, some personal contribution. This last bit being, of course, of special importance in the case of a PhD. So, I've identified two dimensions. The first one is philosophy as an art of life. The second one is philosophy as theoretical cursus. There is a third dimension, which is experiential transfiguration. It seems to be the key word here in the case of Zayin's thesis, and interestingly enough, it seems to be the key word for your school as well, the School of Consciousness and Transformation. So the link is you have a double link. The first one is when the art of life crystallizes in some proposition or a systematic set of propositions. And the second one is when speculation or system building has a transformative effect. So I think it's here that we stand in the case of this thesis. Now I have a couple of questions for Zayin. We've already discussed some of these, and interestingly enough, in his presentation, he has evoked some of these puzzles. Well, the first one, oh wait, I have another general comment. How long do I have? 10 minutes or so? 15 minutes? Or
15
share?
minutes, more or less. Yeah, you go.
Sorry?
You're fine. Go ahead.
I'm fine, thank you. I'm fine, you're fine. Okay, so so this was an introductory comment. Now I have a general comment, which is the following. So Zayin's work meets the requirements of academic scholarship. I was especially sensitive to his high level of specialization in religious studies and anthropology, and to the versatility of his arguments. So Zayin has obviously the talent to pick promising scholarly fields and to provide sharp analysis. The arguments weaved are fundamentally transpersonal in nature, addressing beyond ego, integrative and holistic and transformative issues. This is growth, of course. So, well, I've already expressed two little regrets. First is the fact that sometimes there are cryptic statements that are not really clarified, and most of the time I would have been happy to have clear definitions, a priori clear definitions of the concepts that are introduced. Anyway, so let's go for the questions now. The first question, you've already addressed it actually. The question was the following. The dissertation is an atypical work transgressing the boundaries of various complementary disciplines. It is a prism of sorts that constitutes perhaps a preliminary essay in radical empiricism, aiming at a forthcoming publication in Whiteheadian spiritual ecology. You've discussed this. So there is no single argument, but a cluster of arguments. So if, metaphorically speaking, all prismatic refracted lights come from a single beam, one could raise the question of the nature of that beam. Well, you've already done that, but maybe you want to add an extra word about, well, I've written down, you talked about a journey towards who you are and who you have become.
But I think I would add just a simple word, which obviously has to be unpacked in some way, but communication or participation. Like the idea being that the point is not just about my personal transformation, but about is there some way to open up avenues of conversation? So that's the trajectory through, and I'm hoping that, especially in that third chapter, that's unpacked. And if that needs to be clarified in some way, that certainly can be done. But just the idea that these different ecologies actually help to open up communication with different people.
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, as soon as you write something, as soon as you publish some argument, it becomes public. And it becomes indeed a good vector, a good way of discussing issues that otherwise are kept private. Let's assume we've answered or we've done with that question. The second question is directly linked with this one. So I understand that that single light is the author's own personal experience. But the question bounced back, since you have repeatedly qualified yourself in a variegated manner. So as you've already said, as you have just reminded us, you're keen to qualify yourself as a metaphysician, a shaman, and a diviner, if I get the name right.
Yeah.
So if we have a look at the scholar, as you did, how can you put together these three concepts? Since from the very perspective that you're using, the scholar's perspective, there cannot be reconciliated unless you take a step backwards and hence use different concepts.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Of course, from the perspective of philosophy itself, it's easy to do, since philosophy is allowed, according to radical comparison, to deal with every experiences and every perspectives, and it's supposed to look for abstractions that allow us to deal with all these dimensions. But if you stick to these naturalist, animist, and totemic concepts, if you stick to them, how can you pretend to be both three?
Sure.
Not only existentially, but also here from the perspective of a dissertation.
Sure. So I think, a couple of things. One is, let's say just personally, you can't be all three at one time, right? You can't engage, so just, that's simple. You can't do all three at one time, but you can do all three. And then something that comes out of Levinson's neo-orphan relativity, which is kind of played out in the dissertation, people do all of these things all the time, right? And Descola actually doesn't push that point. Like, Descola says these are radically different ontologies, but then he's totally on board with the idea that these occur in the same person or in the same place. So that basically is I feel like it's more of a problem for Descola than it is for me. And I think that by reading Descola next to Desmond, you get some sort of shared agapic, for lack of a better word, ground. And so if there's a shared agape, or something, whatever we want to call it, the mysterious, right? That different erotic impulses are viable, and that you could do many of them, but highly unlikely at the same time.
Because the metaphysical premises are different, of course.
Sure. Sure. No, radically different. And from just speaking for myself, I really felt like I almost lost my mind over all this, right? Like it's not an easy road. I had to, my mind, my sort of naturalist self had to let go of its need for solid ground in order for all this to happen. Good luck with that journey if you want to jump on it, because there's no guarantee you're going to make it through.
So, well, the answer is neti then. Neither this nor that. It's beyond, it's something else.
Well, kind of. I would speak for myself and say that it's totally possible. But then I think you can find, like I reference, Jacob would know the author, but the New Metaphysicals, right? What is their name?
Courtney Bender.
Courtney Bender. So just going through, like, there's all these students at Harvard, and look at all these, they're doing this and this and this. This does happen. This happens in this school all the time. It's not so crazy. So that would kind of be the answer, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Among all the questions that are that I have in my sleeves. I don't know, let's pick one here. It's about the relativization of technoscience and more traditional worldviews. At one point you write, Euro-American thought beholden to a naturalist ecology. You don't want to dismiss more Euro-American thought than Amerindian thought.
Yeah.
So basically it's the old question, which is essentially in anthropology of relativism, isn't it? But don't you think that we have some puzzling issue here? Because when you confront the traditional societies with technoscience, history has shown that technoscience has no problem to obliterate all these societies. And it seems indeed that it has more applicability than these local societies.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if you just use the Dogra, for example, right? The Dogra are playing a long game. Like, it's not going to work forever. So, I mean, the Dogra would see the applicability of technoscience as minimal because of its tendency, in this case, what I'm saying, towards curiosity. Like, Aristotelian science might have a longer lifespan than mechanistic science because of the curiosity. Like, it's gone too far. And so I think you'd have to distinguish between those things. And yes, in the last couple hundred years, it's taken over. But how long is that going to last? And so curiosities don't have enough juice to keep going, I don't think. And I think the Dogra, they wouldn't say it in that way, right? But I think a lot of the Dogra and a lot of West Africans would say, yeah, I mean, this is a blip on the screen. It sucks, but it's a blip on the screen. I don't know if that answers the question.
I'm not sure I got everything, but I think that the main point is that locally, technoscience seems to have some advantages and is more applicable, etc. But in the long run, not only we are all dead, but we'll be all dead thanks to technoscience.
That's a good way to put it.
The traditional way of living seems to be less adequate, but in the long run, we all live. We could all live through that sort of worldview.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I would really argue strongly is I wouldn't go back to an animist, strictly ecology, right around like Aristotle. There is something healthy and good there. Christianity, there is something healthy and good there. The Dogra see Christianity as a perversion, but I wouldn't say that. And so there are healthy expressions of a naturalist ecology, but is there an erotic nature to it, or has it gone into curiosity? And the same could be said just as easily of totemic. What are totemic people and animist people scared of? They're scared of sorcerers, right? So it's not as if they don't have their own curiosities and people fascinating and messing up reality in different ways. So this isn't like just a naturalist problem. This is like any one of these things could fall into abstraction and become problematic.
I see it's, I got 22 minutes, it seems, or 20 something. Should I leave it like that? Jorge.
Yeah, maybe this is a good time for now, and then so we can pass to Jake and I, and then if there is time at the end, maybe we can also come back to you if there is any other question or comment you have at the end once you have gone through. Is that okay? Thanks so much, Michelle. Thank you. So I'm going to pass the word now to Jacob Sherman, the second committee member.
Thanks. Zayin, thanks for a a fascinating, bewildering, sometimes dizzying, but genuinely rich and stimulating dissertation. It's really a pleasure to serve on your committee. I think just for the sake of those who are here, I think you've done a number of things really excellently. I think the engagement with Viveros de Castro and De Scola in particular has a lot of legs beyond this room or beyond its. I'm not trying to minimize the power of the transformation that it affected, but for those who don't know you and won't be in the orbit of your radiant power, I think there's a lot that's going on there that I hope sees a fair amount of print. I'm also, Michel started by mentioning the sort of backstory of philosophy, that philosophy always begins by raising metaphilosophical questions. We always have to start by saying, what does it even mean to say we're doing philosophy? How do we do philosophy? And so forth. And he pointed to the three different categories of philosophy as an art of life, the professionalization of philosophy, and philosophy as spiritual transformation. One of the things that stands out to me in what you did, not only in what you did in the dissertation, but also the way you approach things and the way you seem to approach life and people and other creatures, is that philosophy is rooted in friendship. In Book 1 of the Republic, before they can ever get going, Socrates has to sit down with Glaucon and Adeimantus and everyone else who's there and form a society of friends before philosophy can actually progress. Yeah. And it seems to me that your concern is to widen your capacity to form friendships across disciplinary lines, to form friendships across cultural lines, to form friendships across species and somatic and diverse interiority lines. And that, I think, is a project worthy of philosophy. And I just sort of want to start by commending that spirit. It's really, it's ambitious, but it's an ambition worthy of the dignity that I think philosophy at its best aims for. So I have some questions still. I'm going to focus my questions, I think, on this point of relationship. I'm trying to decide which order to put them in. I've been trying to decide for the last hour. One of them is a more technical question about your critique of De Scola's category of analogy. Yeah. I also think it's problematic, partially because I don't recognize what he means by analogy when I think about analogy. Yeah. I think it's problematic too because the idea that there could be pure equivocities, complete differences either of interiority or of soma, of body, would mean that there's no relationship, there's no friendship. So is that even possible? Is that anything other than a sort of like ideal nihilistic type, at which point there is actually nothing? You can't theorize that way. And I wonder that about, though, your concept of atomistic naturalism, too. I wonder if anyone's actually been an analogist in De Scola's sense, or if anyone could actually ever be an atomistic naturalist in your sense, believing in a complete separation, a complete diversity of the interior and the exterior. And I felt like I tried to follow what your critique was, how you were building it and what you were replacing it with. Yeah. But I think I'm still struggling. Yeah. So that's my first question.
So so what De Scola did is he assumed that radical discontinuity in the beginning, right? And then like someone would actually assume, like, what is that? That's a crazy thing. And what I'm doing is saying something different. What I'm saying is that there's a movement of abstraction. So like naturalism in its abstract form, like a movement from eros to curiosity, is a movement from, naturalism is best as erotic, but when it moves into certain curiosities, it tends towards the atomistic. But yeah, I agree with you. I don't think it would ever actually get there. But there's the fear of, right? Like the fear of nihilism is present. But no, I don't think anyone would ever. How could that happen, right? And so I think that's where this is a stronger point, which I hope, like there was a slide where I showed the progression, and I didn't tease out, but that's the, somehow the solution to some extent of the analogy is that atomism is a movement towards curiosity and abstraction, but you can never begin there, and you can never fully realize it. You run out of erotic juice.
I'm sorry, I'm just taking that in and trying to think about that. I guess this raises another one of my questions, which is, if it's the case that, say, atomism or de Scola's analogism is an ideal type, I wonder, you mentioned your fear of becoming, accidentally turning out to have been a kind of grand theorist, and I sometimes wondered when reading this whether that isn't a danger not rooted, say, in your own personality, but rooted in the attempt to use a typology to capture cultural centers of gravity. I mean, if I think about, say, Hans Blumenberg's work on the origins of the modern age, he also makes the argument that modernity effectively bootstraps itself into existence by embracing untethered curiosity with no sense of contemplation or gratitude or sort of participatory knowing. And while that's true that, in a sort of broad scheme, we can say, yes, modernity moves in that direction as if we're moving towards one of the two foci of an ellipse away from the other one. It seems not to apply to moderns by and large. And likewise, I think that the problem, say, of using naturalism to characterize Aquinas or Aristotle or Bacon all in the same group alongside most of the West, whatever the West is. Sure. It just seems like a tool that's too blunt to know the people it tries to know. And here's one of the things. I guess the way I might put it is this: do you know the work of Michel Serres at all? He's Michel Serres is a French philosopher and cultural theorist, part of the Académie Française, but also taught for a very long time here in Stanford. But Serres has a book recently. I think the title is something like Écrivains, savants et philosophes, writers, knowers, and philosophers, in which he takes de Scola's categories and he uses them to think about a diversity of figures throughout history. But unlike the sort of account that you, and it seems like de Scola tends towards, in Serres' work, the animists end up being people like Plato's there beside Bergson, beside, I'm not sure about Leibniz, but beside Proust, and Aristotle is not a naturalist, but is characterized as, I think, a totemist, and a number of different, so this whole, in a sense, he pays closer, thicker attention to these individuals and finds that they end up not fitting this almost diachronic category or broad cultural distribution of types, but instead each culture has this radical sort of diversity, rainbow plurality of different kinds of thinkers and beers in the midst of it. And I wonder, so I just wonder about how that works. This is like the nuclear option. One could take your 5 categories or de Scola's 4 categories and redo Samuel Huntington's Clash of Civilizations based on it, right? And color the world according to animist, naturalist, etc. types.
Yep.
How do you avoid that, and how do you methodologically hack it so it doesn't end up with that kind of a viral effect?
Sure. I mean, so a few things, right? Like, there was a large piece where I engaged when you were writing about, like, your engagement with genealogy of participation, right? That I took out of the dissertation. But in that, right, Plato's a totemist and a naturalist. Schelling's a totemist. Who's an, you know? So I get the idea, and the point of pushing at Whitehead is to say, like, when he's searching for atomism, I think he finds animism, right? And I think that the whole there's the movement of thinking through things, or sort of the new mechanism, all these things. I think there's a pushing towards animism there. I think that actually modern science is pushing us in that direction. And so those are things that need to be teased out. And again, Whitehead is, I think, clearly a totemic. I think he takes on Plato's totemic and naturalist thought and adds animism. And so I would, you know, I don't know. Like, did I just have to get all this out of me so that I could then do that? Maybe. But that was sort of lightly done in that piece that I took out, and is the intention going forward. And for me, for whatever reason, the animist piece is interesting, because I think totemism and naturalism are very part and parcel to the Western tradition, but I think that animism sometimes is a little antithetical. And so tracing that and finding, like, teasing that out in different people. And I think Whitehead's a great one. But I also think that really the new materialism, like, there's all these people writing all kinds of books, that they're actually, it's animism. That's what they're after. Including, like, the thinking through things, which is Martine Holbrod. Like, a bunch of students of Viveros Castro are, in a sense, doing this already, right there. So that would be my answer. So I agree with you, but I didn't do it.
So, for my final question, and then I'll pass it over to Jorge.
Yeah.
I want to pick up on something Michelle was asking. I liked your account of the of why we might take, say, animist or Daguerreotype traditions as equally applicable, say, to naturalist traditions in the long run. But I'm still, there's still this question of, he raised it in the context of technoscience.
Mm-hmm.
I'd almost slightly alter it into the context of technopower.
Yep.
That there is a sense in which we can make things, do terrible things, and also some really wonderful things through, with a kind of extraordinary global dynamic scope in our, I'm not going to use the terms of naturalist or
Yeah.
whatever, just in our sort of like modern scientific technophilic civilization. And it seems to be tied to a notion of things at the physical level being either right or wrong. We get some things, I don't mean to present a kind of verificationist account of science, but there's a sense in which we test whether it works, and that becomes our category of, is this right or wrong? And it's very crucial to us that we have the possibility of falsification, not as a category of truth. I'm not doing the Vienna Circle or something here. But that seems to give a certain power.
Yeah.
I feel like going forward, especially those who haven't already stepped over the green line into the circle, that would be one of the questions people raise is, yeah, that's fine to say that people have different bodies and things like that, but these bodies still, certain effects happen to them when a truck hits it or something, and that seems to be a very necessary part of a wider, broader engagement philosophically, right? So still thinking in terms of relationship. You want to communicate, you want to build these friendships across disciplinary boundaries. This question about the apparently non-relative power of exploding atoms and things like that will be raised. And as an addendum to that, the other question I'd want to ask is, do you have a category of something being wrong or falsified, which I think is also related?
Yeah. So I'll do the last one first. So, and hard to push me on this too. So, yes, right? So abstraction is efficacious. Too much abstraction, the friendship is gone, right? So pushing towards, and what Desmond would say, push curiosity too far, it's monstrosity. So that's one answer. Too much, like abstraction to the point of a monstrosity, sorcery, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, that's like a pretty no-brainer. But then I think what's more interesting is getting groups of folks who strongly identify as, let's say, we're going to cut down the rainforest, right? We're all just going to go cut down the rainforest. And the Ashwar are saying, whoa, 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 whoa. There's this whole other reality going on. And so, not that the Ashwar is right or the log cutter is right? But that they could potentially be in communication. So the idea being that you could identify strongly as one or another of these things or other things, because the thing is, you could blow up the skull as whole interior physicality, the sort of sky's the limit. This is just a really, it's too narrow, really. But just the idea being really honoring those radical differences and being in conversation, and not that one's right or wrong. But I think that within each of those communities there are clear ideas about what is right and wrong, right? But what in natural, what I'm calling in naturalism, and it's something that I talk about at some point in the dissertation, right? The difference between true and cool. Right? In West Africa, it's what's cool. Here, it's what's true. Those are equally valid, but we need to get those into conversation. So it's really, there's a very clear thing in West Africa. You can figure out really quickly, is someone, are they cool or not? And but that wouldn't make necessarily any sense over here. But it might, and then you start to get those things in conversation. So it's more of a conversational, beyond the extreme monstrosities and sorceries and abstraction, it's conversational. And bringing different modes of finding what is true together. But then the second question, but it works, right? Like bombs work. What do we do about the bombs? That's, yes, they do. I don't think that any, like a dog or a person, right? That they don't discount the fact that the bomb works. They don't discount the fact that sorcerers are incredibly efficacious and dangerous. Right? Those are two different realities and two different groups of people that have gone beyond the bounds of friendship, way beyond. And so there's not a question of that one that one is the one that works and ours doesn't. It's that they're both real, right? Like, yes, when you get hit by a truck, you die, and you become a chicken, or a truck, or something else. Like, whatever, you die, you can come back. It's not a big, what's the big deal? So like both of those things are true.
Just to say back what I felt like I heard you saying. In the one, am I right in hearing you say that the apparent sort of the kicking the stone response to the question of relativism and so forth makes sense so long as you absolutize. It's tied to a naturalist absolutization of the time span of this given body, almost. That, in a sense, you made an appeal there that I think is interesting for your work. You made an appeal to say the apparent finality of techno-scientific power is itself relativized if you don't think of human life and concerns as limited to this particular lifespan, 70 years if I'm lucky or whatever. And that's actually, I think, an intriguing sort of diagonalization out of the problem, and then might allow you to have a conversation that's not just, say, relativist, but nor is it just capitulating to kind of the power of techno-industrial.
Yeah, and then I would take it for a moment, but I wouldn't take it all the way. Like, I would come back in and say, the time thing is great. I've had maybe a little firmer ground, but I would come in again stronger and say, no. It's not that there's relativism, but when I kick that rock and it moves, it has as much to do with an animist perspective on what is going on than it is a naturalist, right? Like, the rock has a set of feelings, I have a set of feelings, we're interacting in the same kind of way. Like, both of those are true at the same time. There's no reason why these things can't be true at the same time. Why do we put, like, and so part of what I was thinking when you were saying that, Lucius Outlaw, like Africa, he writes that African philosophy is actually this big, broad, robust thing, and Euro-American philosophy is not, because Euro-American philosophy only talks with Euro-Americans, right? African philosophy is more robust because they're in conversation with more people. And so the robustness of that, right? Like, well, we're looking for, like, yes, you're right? You kick the thing and the thing happens. And have you thought about have you talked to anyone else about the situation? And don't just discount them out of the hand. So that's the friendship piece again. Like, we need a robust conversation.
Thank you, Jake, so much for your great questions, and thanks for your responses. So, wow, what a journey, what a trip, an amazing journey. And I have like 100 questions, and you'll find many of them in the manuscript. But one of the things I want to highlight here, also echoing Jake's, is praising you as a writer. Also, you come out. You're a dissertation student still at least for still 10 more minutes, and you come out in the printed pages with the voice as a seasoned scholar. And it's pretty impressive to see the canvas of references that you use, specialize, and really all the fields that you touch. It's pretty impressive. So I really echo, Nick, I really have great hopes for your work to be published in both specialized journals and as a book too, as specialized you developed, and you tighten it up, because it needs a lot of tightening it up. This is a work in progress, by the way. Like all really interesting works are works in progress, right? Yeah. So also I want to just mention before going to my questions, like one of the things I really valued about your process and this work is I think really embodies with our colleague Jeffrey Kripal calls hermeneutical union with a work, with the text, hermeneutical union of the text in which is both personally transformative, but also is capable of producing like powerful insights into the phenomenon that you study. So I think your work exemplifies this. I think very relevant for CS students, right? That we're interested in both knowledge and transformation. Consciousness and transformation, as Michelle was reminding us, is the name of the school. So this is really good. And it's an interdisciplinary work, a lot of breadth, and obviously the danger of sacrificing depth, But I think your work does a pretty good job of going into many directions in, deep ways, and of course there is always that danger there. But finally, also a word of gratitude, also personal, and also on behalf of, those of us who identify ourselves as participatory thinkers, and I think your work kind of like situates participatory studies in conversation with very relevant kind of contemporary developments in anthropology and in religious studies, in philosophy, that many of us haven't really engaged. So I think it's a great service to us as a field and as a community of scholars. And also you're developing this kind of still rudimentary, but the contours are there, kind of like an account of conscious evolution that is more attuned to participatory sensibilities. So I think that needs to be developed, but it's really promising. So now I'm going to my questions, and the first one, it's about you offer this new category building on Desmond's work you call primary or agapeic participation, and I find it really persuasive. That kind of conceptualization of that type of participation, and I was wondering two things about it. One of the ways that you define this primary of agapeic participation is one in which the distinction between self and other is at least minimal, right? This is precisely how Lévi-Brühl understood participation mystique and archaic participation in some ways. So I'm wondering if is there any difference between Lévi-Brühl's participation mystique and this agapeic participation on the one hand? And on the other hand, if this primary participation is kind of like foundational, as you say, for all other forms of participation, in what ways is this reintroducing a lineality, in modes of participation, and in what ways is this really a problem? And you have, like, in your dissertation, you alert the readers of like a misreading of our work when we talk about archaic, romantic, and inactive participation as a lineal, progressive thing, and obviously that's problematic. But given that, like, of course, there are problems, with those readings made by the ideologues of progress, But is it all historical lineality necessarily problematic, malign, or wrong? Wouldn't we be able to envision that perhaps in the dawn of humanity was pretty much pan-human to be immersed in this primary participation, and that it was through this process of self-determination that we start kind of like coming from it towards animistic and totemic participation, participatory modes, I just want to engage you there.
Yeah. So let me do the last one and then remind me of the first kind of part of that. So the linearity, of course, if you're a naturalist, right? Like, yes, that's totally true. But you also have to account for the idea that for other people deeply identified as an animist, that's not true, right? So both of those things, it's not to say, like, it's not to get rid of, like, in order for there to be a linearity, there has to be a stability of some kind. And I think that's where naturalism comes in. Like, there's one reality, right? There's one, there's something that's one. And then you can get this linear thing. And that's totally true. Yes, basically everyone's animist to some extent, but not everyone's taking the naturalist turn, right? Or not everyone's taking the totemic. Those are more abstract. And you could follow lines and see where people, so that's all true, and there's also a totally different reality that's also totally true.
We'll leave the Lévi-Brühl thing, technical thing for our conversation. Yeah, because.
But I think it's a good question. But
I have like 5 minutes,
and
I really want to. But what you said, it's interesting, and I still struggle with what you response. I just want to put it here because I still, when I think like, well, okay, we have different ecologies and different realities and worldviews, but. To what extent, what was going on planet Earth in terms of human consciousness, like, let's say, like 500 or like 200,000 years, or like 600,000 years, was a reality there that is kind of somehow independent from those ecological readings. and I understand that you would say you will go back this naturalistic reading, and I'm struggling with that. I'm struggling with that.
Yeah,
but in any case, the other question, and I had more, but I'll just go back. I'm going to go back to the question of relativism, and we discussed this throughout. But I'm going to approach it from a different angle. You know, Jake was pressing from a more cognitive relativism, you know,
Yep.
and I would like to praise it from a more moral relativism here, you know. You have made a really persuasive, beautiful case, you know, that about these different ecologies of participation and really building bridges of communication, you know, and friendship, you know. But at the same time, friendship, as we all know, genuine friendship is not only based on respect and celebration of the other, but also on genuine confrontation. Right?
Yeah.
It's another matter of friendship, right?
Yep.
So in that context, like my question for you, I mean, you write at some place, like, you know, all the colleagues should be encouraged to the extent that they somehow encourage the good. And the good is defined by the multiple ecologies, you know, like, right? So, but my question for you is like, on what grounds, if any, or what grounds do you offer, if any, for cross-ecological criticism, from cross-ecological critical engagement, you know? You know, in what ways can you or anyone else, if you embrace these ecologies of participation, really legitimately critique cannibalism or female sequestration or other things that many of us would like to have grounds to critique? And also, what you ask the question in the dissertation: should Tupinamba cannibalism be stopped? But you never really answer it. So I don't know what you think, and I would love to know.
Yeah. Well, I think like that example, right? So a particular kind of cannibalism, real cannibalism, like literal cannibalism, eating people, right? In Amazon, should that be stopped? And maybe not, right? Like so De Scola does this really interesting thing, and it's brought out throughout the whole anthropological literature about how cannibalism unites community. Cannibalism, so predation. So De Scola says there's predation, sharing, and obligation, and I tried to tease that part out in the fourth chapter, right, around like a guest protocol and how to interact with each other. And so De Scola is making a real, he's saying predation is important. And so I use the idea of a missionary being a predator and a cannibal being a predator, and that both of those maintain communities. So should we stop missionary work? There's a lot of people that say we should. Should we stop cannibalism? A lot of people are going to, you know, so, but it's interesting, I don't know, like if we could take a step back, and maybe this kind of ecologies of participation can help you at least take a step back and say, because I found that fascinating, that so in the anthropological literature there's a ton of stuff written about how cannibalism creates a cohesive unit, social units, that war is required.
Yes. Well, time is almost over, and so this is going to be our ongoing conversation for time to come as you work towards your book. I have questions about justifying certain forms of suffering and oppression because of social functional cohesion, you know, that produce, you know. I think there is like some ethical questions that are very important. But we're going to leave it here because we need a few minutes to go outside the room, and then we'll come back. And in the meantime, I invite the audience to engage Zayin, and he's really stimulating and great work. So.
And then Michelle, they're going to call you on your telephone.
And so you should probably not be on screen.
Well, you can just, Michelle, you can just mute your screen, and then we'll give you a telephone.
Say that again?
So he's not on screen. We're going to mute. So they're going to call you, Michelle, on your phone.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm David. I'm in EWP. I'm just curious about two or three things. One is, have you had that? Maybe you said it. I think you said it. That you had that light experience that when you touch the rock at Machu Picchu,
Yeah.
have you had that often, and can you, many times or any time since then, and can you access that?
Yeah. So once I got shot back out of the rock, the world has been white vibrating light since then. And so what that has made me do is, it was about, I would say it was about 3 or 4 years of just total insanity. Right?
Total what?
Insanity, fear, anxiety, death, all the time. Just bam, bam, bam. So it took me about 4 years to where I finally walked out into a field in northern Wyoming and realized there was no way out. And then somewhere in there was like a click. I don't exactly know how it happened, but I was the light, right? So I had identified as against the light, and suddenly I was the light. And so the experience since then has been like as I get identified as something, the light shows up all of a sudden. And then I have to go through that all again. And so it's just it's a continual experience of going through that. And now it can happen in a few moments. It took, it was like, it got to the point where it was like an hour, 15 minutes, a couple minutes. So I often get stuck in the bathroom, literally. Like that's, go to the bathroom, now you're stuck. Light. So like I'm attached to something.
Can you make, I don't want to take time away from other people.
Yeah.
I just want to follow on that for one quick second. So are you saying you can access it almost at any time now, willfully, or it comes upon you sometimes? Involuntary.
Well, you can't access it because it's the only thing there ever was. Like, there's no accessing anything, right? It's more what happens is you realize yourself as something separate, and that's when it gets crazy. So there's no accessing anything. There's identifying as something other than. That's when it gets something. There's nothing
And you
without.
don't normally do that on purpose.
No. That sucks. Because something has to die. Like literally, something will die. Whatever you're attached to will not survive this. Go. Yeah. It's always, so death is that teacher of this whole thing.
Dan, I'm wondering on your journey to make meaning of this experience, what other paths you explored or experienced with other traditions? Because what you're describing is talked about in a lot of different traditions. And I'm just wondering, I know you sort of landed in the Dagara tradition as one of your main vehicles for experiencing and understanding, and I'm wondering what else you sort of played with or flirted with.
So my mom, my dad, theosophists, diviners, pagans, esoteric. So I had this whole thing growing up. So I had that kind of like, that's kind of my base. I wasn't born Christian, I was born kind of a pagan, esoteric something. So that's one thing. And then Zayin, like Zen Buddhism was huge for me. And I think is still like, I feel like I'm a Buddhist and I have to do all these other things, actually. Like I'm not Dogger, I'm Buddhist, and now I'm stuck figuring out this crazy Dogger thing this time. So I feel like I'm much more like Christianity, Buddhism, those things have been really, really big for me. And I've always felt pushed into this other stuff. And so the first push was with Michael Harner. That was a big one, and then a few other teachers. And then the Dogger, that's just, I give up. I do it. So that's it. Would you, Aaron?
So there were a couple of times when you were asked a question, for example, about morality, and you said, well, we can use this framework to take a step back. So who are you when you take a step back?
Well, the possibility being that there is a way to take a step back. Like you could, just the basic idea, like there is something else. Like that may be helpful. So maybe the Dagara, just taking them seriously. And so I think, like, to give another example, one of the, like, just let's drop all the ecology stuff, right? When I read African, like Western trained people writing in, like African philosophy is different than West African divination stuff, right? When I read West African philosophers who are trained in the Western tradition, their critique of me is profound. So just that, right? Just find someone who sees you and can really dig in there and be like, see these things, you shouldn't, like, you're assuming all these things. And that African philosophy has been one of my greatest teachers in that one. Because they're so articulate and they're so good. They see me. I didn't even, they said, like, find someone who has been looking at your assumptions because they have to deal with them.
But you're still in one of those structures. You're still in one of these ecologies, so they can look at each other, and they still have their own assumptions and their own worldview. Taking a step back seems to imply that you're somehow going beyond that, integrating that. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think you'll ever get beyond it or integrate it all or anything like that. But I think you could jump into another one. But the idea that there's the big one, I would seriously call that into question. See, even Jorge would say that. Maybe one last one with Tom, and then.
I just got a comment when Leonard Cohen and his Zen guru were talking together one day. The guru says, "Well, I'm not a Zen Buddhist, and you're not a Jew," and that's how you start the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's endless of those stories, right? But the other thing is, and you are a Zen Buddhist and a Jew. Like you do have those assumptions. And so, looks like we're picking up on the screen. Okay. Here we are.
You want to finish your thoughts in one role is we're interrupting the conversation here, and this is a dissertation on communication, so I feel especially guilty about doing that.
Yeah, no.
Okay. So we will have, oh, look at, who's there?
Oh!
Who's there? Who's there?
Hello, hello.
Hello.
Oh, wait.
Oh, you have to put it.
Okay, we're good. We're back on.
Wait. So Hadia's,
hello, what's your name?
Give her a wave, boo.
Hello?
What's the name of your daughter?
Okay, we're listening anyway.
Okay, very good. Okay, so anyway, we have discussed the work and the defense, and the three of us, are very happy to say that we consider the defense more than pass, and there will be some minor changes. Well, some changes, maybe not that minor in this case, but as you know, it's part of the process. And we just wanted to congratulate you, Dr. Zayin.
So I asked Ellie to jump in.
Maybe also Michelle, before we say goodbye to you, is there anything else would you like to say to the new doctor?
Okay, well, I just want to congratulate you. You still hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, fine. So I'm simply willing to congratulate you. I hope that we'll have the opportunity to discuss this and that with regard to your project. And I'd suggest that you stick to the pre-Whiteheadian argument. It will be a Pandora's box if you dive into Whitehead too early.
Yeah. Thank you.
So in another 20 years or so.
Thank you, Michelle.
I'm teasing.
Yeah.
You're ground, but don't go too fast. Otherwise, you leave too many unsolved issues. See?
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michelle.
You're most welcome to stay there in cyber contact as long as you want, or say goodbye now. It's totally up to you. But here we're going to move into, probably people are going to stand up and congratulate the candidate and all that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michelle.
Okay, thanks.
So the doctor is. Oh, yeah.
The organizer has ended the session, and this call will be disconnected. Goodbye.
So Zayin asked you to close really quick, and so in the same way that we opened, that I'm kind of shaking, so I'm reach out and touch someone's hand. So just reach out and grab someone next to you.
Like a circle?
Sure.
I'm the candidate, like the doctor.
Doesn't have to be a circle, just. And again, I'm going to invite you to close your eyes or lower your eyelids, however you feel comfortable. And just going back to that circle that Zayin drew at the beginning of his dissertation. And for a moment, just first seeing, where are you? Did you jump in? Did you jump out? Did you hover above? Did you go into a rock? Just kind of seeing, letting yourself be surprised, where did you end up after these 2 hours? And then wherever you are, I'm going to invite you to just take a seed from the space, from the floor, from the ground, wherever you reach out. Just grab a seed and then consciously step out of the circle, saying thank you to that space, that sacred space for holding us today. And taking that seed with you, the possibility of a new way of communicating with yourself, with someone else, with the world. Putting it in your pocket and taking it home with you to plant in your own garden. And from all of us, just the gratitude of having you here today. Close. And Zayin, just feeling the circle that held you, that witnessed you, that compassion.
Thank you.
So we have some champagne in the back, which will pop open, and we'll be doing lunch down at the Basil Cantina. If anyone wants to join us, 1:30, love to have you there.